Returning to Oak Ridge was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to rebuild after my life had fallen apart. I met my ex-husband and wanted to get back together with him, but when he refused, saying he already had a girlfriend, I planned to kidnap her. I grew up in Oak Ridge, Illinois, a town I once thought I'd never return to. After high school, I left to chase my dreams of becoming a renowned historiographer to escape the quiet life. I spent years pursuing academic success, moving from city to city, always chasing the next opportunity. Along the way, I made choices that cost me my marriage and the stability I once had. These mistakes haunted me, but they also shaped who I am today. When my academic goals didn't pan out, I found myself at a crossroads, realizing I had lost sight of what truly mattered. So, I returned to Oak Ridge, hoping to start over. Teaching history at the local community college wasn't the prestigious career I had envisioned, but it allowed me to reconnect with the simpler things in life that I had overlooked. My name is Marie Walker Thompson, and at 46, I'm back in Oak Ridge, Illinois. This is my third attempt at rebuilding my life, leaving behind the mistakes of my past. Now, I'm a history professor at the local college, a role I once would have dismissed, convinced I was meant for more. I used to believe I was destined to revolutionize history, but that vision wasn't mine. It was something others pushed me into, pulling me away from the good life I once had. I was eager to belong among those I thought were smarter than me, only to realize too late that they had used me. To them, I was just a tool, a joke. After 7 years, I came back home to try to move on. Before I go further, let me describe myself. I'm 5'1" tall with short, wavy black hair, green eyes, and a curvy figure. My best features are my legs, strong, toned, and athletic. They were what first attracted my ex-husband to me, but unfortunately, they also drew in my professors, leading me away from a happy marriage. Speaking of my ex, he's been on my mind a lot lately. Leaving him was the biggest mistake I ever made, though I didn't have much of a choice. You've probably heard this story before. A happily married woman goes back to school, gets seduced by the excitement of a new world, and ends up having an affair with someone in power. In my case, it was the head of the history department who promised to help me achieve academic success. Naturally, that promise included his bed. It started as a thrill, but then he told me I needed to expand my intellectual horizons. My husband found out, and I still remember the day he and his private investigator confronted us. My professor said something stupid, and my husband grabbed him by the throat. After that, my husband kicked me out. He never spoke to me again and gave me everything in the divorce. None of our old friends passed along messages, and the college fired my professor. I had no choice but to move on to California. My professor began passing me around to his colleagues, all under the guise of career advancement. So it became the norm, and after a while, I felt more like his possession than a historian. I saw other historians getting ahead through hard work while I was being used. By the time I realized there was no tenderness or care in the relationship, it was too late. He had no intention of marrying me, telling me I wasn't the kind of woman men marry. No one ever truly cared about me, and I was left feeling empty. The breaking point came after I got out of the shower. Having entertained one of the professor's 75-year-old friends, I overheard them discussing me, saying I wasn't on their intellectual level. According to them, I wasn't even smart enough to teach high school history, let alone college. I spent a lot of time crying after that and faced some hard choices. I couldn't sue anyone because everything I did was voluntary. The professor wasn't married, but he had a long-term relationship with a philosophy professor from Australia who didn't care about his flings as long as he returned when she called. In the end, I got fired for bringing it up, though they agreed not to tarnish my record so I could find work elsewhere. So, I returned to Oak Ridge. The community college here is nice. It's not prestigious, but it serves its purpose. My classes start in 3 days, so on Friday afternoon, I biked around campus to get familiar with the area. While passing an outdoor cafe, I noticed 2 Camaros stopped at a light, seemingly racing. One was a yellow convertible with black trim, the other a black coupe with yellow trim. The drivers, a striking young woman and another person, got out at the same time. I expected a confrontation, but instead they met between the cars, and the man kissed her passionately like they might never see each other again. I smiled, remembering what that felt like and how long it had been since anyone had kissed me that way. The woman was stunning. About 5 or 2 inches and slender but shapely, with long brown hair and big innocent eyes. Though I'm not bisexual, I'd consider it with her. She had a glow that only women in love have, a beauty that transcends physical appearance. She took the man's jacket and cap, put them on backward, and walked into the cafe, tossing her keys to the valet amidst honking from other drivers as the light changed. So the man got back into his car and drove away. It was then that I realized he was at least twice her age. My age. I stood there stunned as I recognized him. My ex-husband and soulmate. I found him. What's going on between him and that girl? My name is David Thompson. 6 years ago, I discovered my wife Marie was cheating on me. We had a great life and I thought our marriage was solid. Her betrayal devastated me. I felt like I wanted to die. But life went on. After some time, I returned to work. I received a small settlement from her old school, but I kept working to help myself move on. For a couple of years, I focused solely on work, avoiding dating or socializing because I thought something was wrong with me. It seemed my love wasn't enough for Marie, and she found other men who were better than me. Eventually, I realized the manufacturing industry in Illinois was struggling, so I decided to go back to school and get a degree. Deep down, I believed that if I had been smarter, Marie might not have left me. I chose business management, but I was terrified. Doubts plagued me. What if I wasn't smart enough or too old to fit in? But I enrolled anyway. The first few semesters flew by, and I earned straight A's. My 4.0 GPA made me realize maybe I wasn't so stupid after all. I still didn't date, especially not anyone in high school, since I was closer in age to the faculty. Starting something with a faculty member wasn't worth the trouble, and dating a young student felt wrong. So then I met Amy in a statistics class. Without even realizing it, my life started anew. We joined a study group with other students, but soon noticed that no one but us was doing much studying, so we became a study group of 2. Spending time together either brings people closer or highlights their differences. For us, we became fast friends. I loved our time together and couldn't wait to see her again. Initially, it was awkward. Guys would approach her at our table as if I didn't exist. I was just the old guy after all. Sometimes she'd use me as a shield to fend off the persistent ones. That's how our first argument began. I told her it wasn't fair to use me to avoid her social issues, that she should handle them herself. Looking back, I was probably just jealous. So either way, she grabbed her books and left the library. After that, I only saw Amy in class. So we didn't talk or sit together. I often noticed her glancing at me, but I never looked back. She joined another study group, and although I had offers due to my good grades, I preferred to study alone. For 2 weeks, we avoided each other, and it might have continued if fate hadn't stepped in. One evening, I saw a guy from her new study group trying to force Amy into his care. She resisted, and before I knew it, I intervened, grabbing him by the collar. Startled, he let go of her and turned to face me. "It's just a misunderstanding," he said. I let him go, but when I heard him mutter something under his breath, Amy started sobbing. Something snapped in my mind, and I punched him. So then I helped Amy up and hugged her. I walked her to her car and stayed until she left. I almost skipped class after that, but I went anyway, arriving late and sitting in the back instead of my usual spot. When I glanced at the board, I saw Amy looking around, so I ducked behind the girl in front of me. We had a group assignment in class, and I worked with the students near me. It was basic work unit circles, commutative to radians, and periodicity. It didn't seem related to business, but it was busy work. We were nearly done when the teacher gave us a break. My groupmates left the room, but I stayed in my seat, reading on my phone. I was halfway through reading when I heard footsteps. I knew it was Amy. I could always sense her presence, but I didn't acknowledge her and walked out of the room. When I returned, Amy was sitting in my seat. The girls I was working with didn't seem to mind, and another guy in our group mentioned that Amy wanted to join us since she was working alone and noticed we were friends. I said, "No problem," grabbed my books, and moved to another row to work alone. I found our mistake, corrected my answers, and turned in my work, listing myself as the only group member. The instructor didn't find it funny, but when I explained it was a group dynamics issue, she softened. After class, Amy was waiting for me outside. She had those big blue eyes that could draw anyone in, and she said, "We need to talk." So I replied, "No, we don't." "Yes, we do," she insisted. "So why?" I asked. She seemed caught off guard and didn't know how to respond. As I walked away, I thought I could avoid her until the next class, and that things would eventually fade. But then she called me, and without thinking, I answered. "Hi," I said. "Where do you live?" "I don't want to talk on the phone," she replied. "Why not?" I asked. "If we can't talk on the phone, we should meet on neutral ground so you can avoid me again." "No, we need to sort this out," she said. Reluctantly, I gave her my address, but suggested meeting in the common area. 10 minutes later, she walked in, and everyone stopped to look at her. She found me, sat across from me, and smiled. "Okay, what's your problem?" she asked. "Nothing," I replied. "Then why are you mad at me?" she asked, her expression a mix of frustration and concern. She was smart and beautiful, and I didn't understand why this mattered so much to her when she could find someone else to study with. "You're the one who stormed out of the library," I said. "Only after you accused me of using you," she shot back. You turned a small argument into a big deal. The next day, I tried to get your attention in class, but you wouldn't even look at me. I moved to another study group, thinking you'd come to talk to me or tell me off, but you didn't. It was like you didn't care, and then that guy grabbed me. I'm sorry, I said, interrupting her. Sorry doesn't cut it, she smiled. Do you know how many people saw him trying to get me into his car and just kept walking? Not you, though. That's when I knew you still cared. And I was looking forward to class. I hoped you'd call me, but you didn't. So I got here an hour early today, hoping we'd talk. She looked at me with intense focus, making me uncomfortable. And you didn't show up. Every time the door opened, I thought it was you, she said. So then when you finally arrived, you didn't look at me. I knew you were still upset. So if I'm not upset, I insisted. You're just being silly, she smiled. I wasn't going to put up with it anymore, so I joined your group and waited for you. She moved closer, and I could smell her perfume. I started to get nervous, but she kept talking. You left the group and worked with someone else. Those two nerdy girls were mean to me after you left, she said. Anyway, that's where we are now. And where is that? I asked. The place where we discuss our problems and try to solve them, she replied. So what do you want to accomplish here? I asked. You're not listening, she said, irritated. I want us to get back to normal. To find normal? I said. We're doing a 16-week course together, right? She nodded. We're halfway through, right? She nodded again. Do you get along with everyone in class? I asked. Of course not, she replied. In 8 weeks, this class ends and we'll probably never see most of these people again, right? I asked. Probably, but what's your point? She asked. We worked together, had a disagreement, and went our separate ways. We both get good grades. Class ends, life goes on, I said. That sounds like a depressing movie, she said softly. But I always get it wrong anyway. Do you know how I felt after what you told me? I felt bad because it was kind of true, but by the next day, I just felt alone. Alone, I asked. I'm taking 4 classes right now. I hate math, she said. We were sitting so close that our hands touched. Ask me what my favorite subject is, she said. Your composition class, I replied. How did you know that? She asked. You told me in the first week, I answered. And you remembered? She smirked. But things have changed since then. Question 2. What color are my eyes? She asked, closing them. Too easy. They're blue, and they get darker when you're upset, I said. See, you're my only friend here, she said. There are plenty of people who want to be your friend, I said. But most of them only want one thing, she replied. How old do you think I am? You're 24, I said. Do you know why it took me so long to start school? I got married a year after high school. I planned to work before college, met a guy. And once we got engaged, the guys who followed me around backed off, she said. I wondered why she was telling me this, but I stayed because I enjoyed being around her. So I'm not stupid. I know what I look like, but I'm not that kind of girl. I wanted to get ahead with my brains, but no one gives me a chance. I waited until after marriage to pursue my goals, but Steve was so persuasive, she said, her voice hardening. 2 nights before the harvest ball, I gave in to him. By the night of the dance, everyone knew. Do you know what his excuse was? She asked. I shook my head. He said I was such a beauty that he had to tell people to change the town's mind about me being uninterested in men. I couldn't believe someone would use such a lame excuse. I forgave him, and we got married. But he cheated on me during our honeymoon with a maid. I just wanted to be a wife and mother. Maybe have a job I enjoyed. But he was sleeping with my friends. Even while we were dating, he was cheating and saw no reason to stop. He told his friend I was a trophy. Nice to look at but useless in bed. My supposed friends were divided into 2 groups. Those jealous of how I looked who secretly dated my husband. And those who were just loose. So I divorced him and got some compensation. What's 50% of nothing? She asked. Listening to her, I realized her life was different than I had imagined. I came here to start fresh and build my career, but the guys are all the same. No one gives me credit for having any brains. They just want something physical, like with Steve. Once they get what they want, they move on. Nice guys are too intimidated to ask me out, and when they do, they end up acting the same once they get comfortable. And then there's you. You actually listen, remember what I say, and look me in the face. I've caught you just looking at my face a few times. I enjoy our time together. I was planning on taking more classes with you after this course. And yes, maybe I did use you a little, letting people think you were my boyfriend, but only because you seemed willing. I thought you liked me too, but then you dismissed me like I didn't matter. That really hurt. She bit her lip and my heart softened. I wanted to see if you'd get jealous when I worked with those guys, but I just got in trouble and you still had to rescue me. Amy, I'm not great with people, I said. I'm almost twice your age. 6 years ago, I went through something similar after a long marriage. My wife cheated on me and left. At least you moved on. I haven't dated or socialized since. I'm not sure I'm good company, let alone a friend anyway. Amy and I made up, passed the statistics exam, and started taking more classes together. Since we were both in business programs, we shared many requirements. Over the next few months, we always studied together, even when it wasn't necessary. She suggested visiting different places to observe how successful and unsuccessful businesses operate. So we went to restaurants, museums, and shopped together. Finally, she asked me to go to a dance club she'd heard about in another class. Amy, I said, shouldn't you ask someone else to go? Why would I do that? She snapped, her eyes narrowed, and I knew to tread carefully. Well, going to a dance club isn't exactly research, I said cautiously. It feels more like socializing, I added. Do you mean it feels like a date? She said, leaning back with a hand on her hip. Exactly, I replied. And I've already explained that I'm not ready for socializing. David, she said, giving me a patient look. We go shopping, visit museums, and eat out together all the time. Have I ever mentioned doing any of these things with anyone else? I thought for a moment. Well, I guess I assumed you did. David, we've been dating for months. Everyone knows it except you, she said. So why can't we go dancing? After the shock of seeing my ex-husband with this girl, I stood outside for a few minutes, still processing. I guess part of me thought that if David was still in the area and hadn't remarried, maybe we had a chance. I knew if I hadn't messed up, we'd still be together, but seeing him with her made me feel awkward. Without thinking, I followed her into the cafe. It was crowded, noisy, and she seemed popular. Everyone knew her as she moved to a table in the back. People kept stopping to talk to her. She ordered a drink, and though several guys asked her to dance, she declined. She chatted with her friends and occasionally took notes in a notebook. I had to admit she was pretty unpopular, but I couldn't figure out why she was with my David. Maybe she was an escort, which would explain a lot. Maybe David, still broken after I hurt him, couldn't form a normal relationship and ended up with someone like her. And while she was the center of attention, I was invisible. I couldn't even get a waiter's attention. Intelligence clearly wasn't valued here. A guy next to me noticed I was staring at her and said, "That's Amy. She's hot, but don't get your hopes up." "She's definitely popular," I replied. "Not in the way you think," he said. "Most of the people around her work for her." So I turned to him, realizing he might have more information. "Let's find a table and talk," I suggested, offering to pay for his food and drinks. That worked, and soon we were seated near her. I hadn't planned this when I left home, but suddenly my life focused on one goal, getting David back. If I had to fight this girl for him, so be it. In my mind, I should be more compatible with David than she was. With my life experience and recent growth, I felt I had the upper hand. If I could make David forget the past, we could start fresh, and I'd spend the rest of my life making it up to him. If he was still holding on to anger after all these years, it meant he still had feelings for me. My newfound friend Josh filled me in. Her name's Amelia, but everyone calls her Amy. She's about 24, but with a body like that, no one cares about her age. His comment about 24 being old almost made me choke. "She's off the market, though," he continued. "Look over there." I watched as guys approached her table, but she turned them all down. The guys at her table stood protectively. "She's loyal to one guy," Josh said, "but everyone's after her because they want to work for her." "What do they do?" I asked. She and her man are business majors. They started a business as a class project, and it took off. It's a brilliant idea, really simple, but no one thought of it before. I was surprised. David hadn't been a business genius when we were married. "They run a temp service that's super efficient," Josh explained. "They're already making a lot of money, and when they graduate, they'll go full-time. You should see their cars, matching Camaros," he sighed. "I'd love to be that guy. He's old but smart and sweet, and she loves him like crazy. So they're always together, holding hands, wearing each other's things. It's sickening, but I'd give anything for her to look at me like that." His words hit me hard, as if he knew exactly what I feared most. I had to reassess my situation. She was prettier than me, clearly better built, and her business skills were far more practical than my academic knowledge of history. The toughest realization was that I had underestimated David for years, thinking he was beneath me, while this girl had seen his true potential and helped him realize it. As I watched, David came up behind her and kissed her gently in an unusual upside-down position. She responded tenderly, stroking his face, then snuggled up to him, glowing with happiness. I couldn't stand seeing her with him. Josh, who I'd been ignoring since David appeared, spoke up again. I told you it's a bit nauseating, but they're cute if you like that fairy tale stuff. They're like a boring old married couple, no wild parties, just doing things together. She's got their whole life planned, and he just goes along with it. He just goes along with it, I asked. He shrugged. Whatever. I was dating one of their employees, and she told me their plan. Finish school, grow their business, buy a bigger place, get married, and have kids. He said it like it was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. What a waste of education, he scoffed. But I guess they know what they want. Me, I'm going to travel the world, make tons of money, and not stop for anything. In the back of my mind, I thought, after a while, that wild lifestyle gets old. You start to feel like an object, not a person, and realize you don't matter to anyone. And I came here thinking she was a courtesan, and now I realize I'm the one who's been acting like a tramp. And even worse, my ex-husband is in love again, maybe even more deeply than with me. I tossed a couple of bills on the table and left before Josh's food even arrived. David was completely focused on her and didn't even notice me. Amy and I officially started dating, and it was both weird and wonderful. We had a lot in common, but also faced some differences. So we usually laughed them off and found compromises. The age gap wasn't an issue since she was old-fashioned, and we both had trust issues from our pasts. We were like two broken birds who couldn't fly alone but soared together. Our company, Walker & Company, began as a learning project. We created a fake temp agency as part of a class assignment, with Amy handling the administrative side and me managing operations. We weren't physically engaged yet, but we cuddled and kissed a lot. Our agency used college students to fill job vacancies, making it unique. We created all the necessary materials, spreadsheets, flyers, business plans, even letterhead and business cards. When we presented our idea, the professor reminded us that a group project required more people. He suggested some students, and we chose Sarah Johnson to join us. She wasn't a partner, but became an essential team member. Sarah had a talent for marketing, an area Amy and I hadn't focused on. She took over that aspect while we continued refining the business. One day after getting our grades, we received a call from someone who found one of our business cards and wanted to hire us. We laughed about it with Sarah, but Amy turned serious and asked, "David, what are we going to do next?" "Whatever you want, Amy," I replied. "No, seriously," she said. "I don't want us to drift apart, working for different companies and losing touch." I assured her I'd never cheat on her, and we decided to turn our project into a real business. Our plan was to provide temporary workers for various businesses, college students with relevant skills to fill roles from secretaries to lab technicians. It was a win-win. Businesses got skilled workers, students earned money, and we made a profit with minimal startup costs. Amy handled the finances, I focused on client relationships, and Sarah launched a marketing campaign. We even developed a system where professors recommended top students receiving a small percentage in return. This encouraged students to work harder, knowing they could get a job through our company. The best part was that Amy and I spent even more time together. We ran the business from my apartment, often spending days working and planning. Eventually, Amy started bringing her clothes over to change there, especially during our late-night study sessions. One night, as I practiced a PowerPoint presentation, I noticed Amy falling asleep. "Come on, sleepyhead, I'll take you home," I said. "I'll just sleep here," she replied. I was stunned. The next morning, when Sarah arrived, her usual bubbly self, she asked, "Where's Amy?" "She's still asleep," I replied. "Why don't you go get her?" "Did you two have a fight?" she asked. "I don't need to, she's here," I said. Sarah raised an eyebrow but stayed silent. "So that's how rumors start," I added. "She slept in the bed and I took the couch. Seriously, you're pretty clueless for someone older and supposedly wiser. A woman who likes you spends the night and you didn't even stay with her," she said, clearly hinting at something I hadn't considered. "Maybe she just wanted to test if I could be trusted," I replied. Just then, Amy emerged from the bedroom, sleepy and headed to the shower. Sarah, still in disbelief, said, "I can't believe you two aren't, this is getting serious. Everyone in her dorm will notice." "Notice what?" Amy asked, toweling her hair and handing me a brush. "So that you didn't go home last night," Sarah replied. "I am home, or would be if someone asked me," Amy said. "Asked you about what?" I asked. "You're so oblivious," Sarah said, so Amy moved in with me. We still weren't physically engaged, but I was thrilled. After the first night, she told me I could sleep in bed with her if I kept my hands to myself. But I stayed on the couch, not wanting to risk anything. The next night, she pulled me onto the bed and simply said, "Please stay." The next morning, we woke up together, saved by Sarah's usual early morning knock. "Hey guys, have you checked our corporate bank balance lately? We're doing great. With the money, I'm buying a car, so no more rides from you two," she said. And that's how Walker and Company started and how Amy and I grew even closer. For about 3 weeks, I settled into my new routine, teaching classes, grading papers, attending meetings, and trying to reconnect with old friends. Unfortunately, most of them still wanted nothing to do with me. Time hadn't healed those wounds. To avoid anyone from my new life, I started going to a clubhouse 50 miles away. Few men approached me at first, but later in the night, a pot-bellied guy did. We ended up in the back seat of his car, a reminder of how low my relationships had sunk since my marriage ended. My heart ached, and though I never saw David or his new girlfriend around campus, I constantly heard about them. So one day, a new friend, Laura Bennett, suggested I get out more and invited me to a girls' night out. We agreed to meet at a bar, the same one I'd visited the week before. When I arrived at the staff office, I heard Laura's voice and sat down to wait. She called me in and introduced me to someone, but time slowed when I saw who it was. There she was, tan, long legs, wavy hair, and plenty of cleavage. David recognized me instantly, recoiling in disgust. Before I could say anything, his girlfriend jumped between us protectively. Laura quickly tried to diffuse the tension, realizing her mistake too late. David muttered something and left without looking me in the eye like I was some rabid dog. Amy, his girlfriend, stared me down, sizing me up. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know," Laura said, realizing the situation. "Ex-wife," I clarified, confirming Laura's guess. Laura was surprised and said she hadn't expected that, noting the thick tension between us. She added, "You don't seem like his type." "Because I'm not a 20-year-old cheerleader," I snapped back. "Don't underestimate her, she's smart," Laura warned. "And if she thinks you're a threat, it could get ugly." Still in shock, I nodded as Laura pressed for more details. I briefly told her about my marriage to David, how he had supported me, and how I had ultimately betrayed him. When he found out, it broke his heart, and he just left. So we never talked again until today. Laura empathized, noting that academics often fail to meet expectations. I explained how my relationship with my professor had fallen apart, and how I ended up teaching at a community college. Now David was back in my life, but he wouldn't even look at me. "You want him back, don't you?" Laura asked. "With every breath I take," I admitted. Laura advised me to move on, but she also mentioned I had a couple of options. First, I could hire a lawyer to amend our divorce agreement, forcing David to communicate. Second, since I never signed the divorce papers, we might still be legally married, and David living with Amy could be considered infidelity. My eyes widened at the possibilities. If we were still married, I could force him into counseling and temporarily disrupt his relationship with Amy. And if something happened to her, who else would David turn to but me? Helping him through his grief could erase my past mistake. I realized I needed a lawyer, a plan, and some makeup. I said, "Amy, we need a vacation." She raised 2 fingers, asking, "Where are we going and for how long?" "Anywhere," I replied. "How about Paris? Women always want to see Paris," she suggested. "Not me," she said. "It's just another city." "And why now?" She eyed me suspiciously. "It's because of that evil woman, isn't it?" I should have kicked her back then. I found this amusing. Amy rarely used profanity, and imagining her trying to fight Marie was funny, considering Amy's petite size. Still, her protectiveness made me love her more. "We're not leaving town because of her," Amy declared. "We have a business to run. Plus, I'm already on vacation. Every day with you is a vacation, David. It's not the dream I had as a little girl, but right now, I can't think of anything better than us. That woman hurt you once, but I won't let her do it again. She teaches history, and we don't need to deal with her. Let her go to hell," she said firmly. "So anything else, ma'am?" I asked with a grin. "Yes, we need a board meeting right now," she smiled playfully. "I'll call Sarah," I said. "Not that kind of meeting," she laughed. "So the kind we have in the bedroom when I'm bored." She jumped up and ran for the door, and I chased after her, forgetting my worries. Why was I worried? I was in love with the most beautiful girl in the world. Why care that my bitter ex-wife worked at our school? Because life always finds a way to mess with you, that's why. Over the next few days, I worked hard on my plan, focusing on 3 main areas. First, I needed a good attorney to explore the legal aspects, especially the possibility that David and I might still be married. I hadn't signed the divorce papers, but there was a clause stating they'd be finalized after a certain period regardless. However, David had just disappeared after filing the lawsuit. If he hadn't signed the papers, the case could be dismissed. My priority wasn't his money. I wanted David back, and naturally, his money would follow. The second part of my plan involved improving myself. I joined a gym, hired a personal trainer, and started a strict diet and exercise routine. Competing with Amy required me to be in my best shape, though I knew I could never match her beauty. And yes, I flirted with the trainer a bit, but so what? Oh, the final part of my plan involved finding people who hated Amy as much as I did. Ideally, they would catch her leaving a restaurant or club and rough her up while David waited. I wanted the incident recorded so I could show it to David, making him believe she did it willingly. That way, she'd be just like me. A cheater. And he'd leave her. I could then swoop in and pick up the pieces of his shattered heart. A few weeks later, I was ready. My attorney confirmed that our divorce was never finalized, meaning we were still legally separated. There had been no contact or division of property, but this was enough for my needs. So my lawyer advised me that pursuing money wouldn't get me anywhere, but all I wanted was a meeting with David. Originally, that meeting was more than I'd hoped for, but now, if everything went according to plan, I could have it all. On the day of the appointment, I dressed carefully in a new floral print dress and had my hair freshly styled. I sat in my attorney, Mike Johnson's office, waiting. Things didn't go as I expected. David never did what I anticipated anymore. I had hoped he'd come alone or, at worst, bring Amy, but instead he arrived with the largest divorce law firm in the state. 4 lawyers, 2 secretaries, a paralegal, and a transcriptionist. After the legal team entered, David walked in, holding Amy's hand. This time I got a good look at her. She was naturally gorgeous, without makeup or surgery. This was going to be tough. She also had a fierce look that made me realize she was more formidable than I first thought. She wore a conservative black dress, making my outfit seem less serious, and she never let go of David's hand. Then I saw it. The largest sapphire engagement ring I'd ever seen, surrounded by diamonds. There was no way I'd let her marry David. My lawyer made his statement, but it became clear we wouldn't see a trial. David's legal team crushed him. By the end, he was practically serving them coffee. However, he managed to secure one key point. I needed a face-to-face meeting with David to sign the papers. That was my real goal all along. But the lawyer explained that I felt guilty about how our marriage ended, and after counseling, I wanted to help David find closure. His legal team agreed it sounded reasonable, and David nodded silently. The lawyers began leaving the room to give us privacy. 10 minutes, I said coldly. You give your speech and we're done. I'm staying, Amy said, standing up, her eyes fixed on Marie like a lioness ready to fight. That's fine, Marie lied. I hoped you'd stay. Both Amy and I were surprised by her response. I had wanted to be alone with Marie, but had prepared for Amy to be there. David, I want to apologize sincerely for how I treated you and how our marriage ended. It was entirely my fault. You didn't deserve it, and you deserved better. Marie then turned to Amy and said, Amy, at your age, you might not realize it, but balancing a career and home life is hard for a woman. I chased academic success and sacrificed everything important, but I ended up with nothing. The people I trusted took advantage of me, and by the time I understood what I'd lost, it was too late. Looking back at me, she continued, I still remember the hurt in your eyes, David, when you found out. It bothered me, but not enough to stop. If I could do it over, I'd come to you for help because I know you would have tried to save me. I'm glad you found someone to help you move on, and I hope your life together is even better than ours. She sighed. I was shocked when I saw you both in Laura's office. I had no idea you were here, David, or that you were dating someone. Our old friends won't talk to me, so I didn't know where you were. I hope my apology eases the tension, and maybe in time we can be friends. She turned to Amy again. Amy, if I hurt you that day, I'm sorry. It's hard to see the man you loved happy with someone else. You both seemed blissfully happy, and that's all I can say. Please forgive me. I could tell I had some success. Amy's face softened a bit, and she no longer looked like she was ready to bite her nails. But David was just as angry as ever, clearly not buying anything I said. They both stood, nodded at me, and headed for the door. Amy glanced back with a sad smile, leaving me wishing I could read her mind. But David didn't even look at me. I couldn't understand it. If he hated me so much, didn't that mean he still had feelings for me? And if he still had feelings, why was he with someone like her? After we left Marie's office, Amy was unusually quiet, clearly processing everything. Finally, she asked David, do you think she really meant the apology? I glanced at her and then back at the road. I don't know, Amy. So maybe she does, maybe she doesn't, but it doesn't change anything for us, she sighed. You're right. It's just hard to believe someone can change that much. I nodded. People can change, but it doesn't erase the past. She was silent for a while, deep in thought, then asked, do you still have feelings for her? The question hit hard. I pulled over and faced her. Emmy, I don't have feelings for her anymore. What I feel now is anger, disappointment, maybe some pity. But love? No, that's gone. She studied my face, then said softly, okay, I believe you. I took her hand. Amy, you're the one I love, the one I want to be with. The Marie is my past, you're my future. She smiled, squeezing my hand. Thank you, David. I needed to hear that. We sat there for a moment, holding hands. Then she said, let's go home. The days after our meeting were tormenting. I couldn't stop thinking about David and Amy, replaying every word and gesture in my mind. Had I said too much or too little? Was there any chance he still had feelings for me? Or was it truly over? I became obsessed with their every move, trying to figure out how to drive a wedge between them. My plan to make Amy look like a cheater was already in motion, but the waiting was unbearable. Each day, I grew more desperate and frantic. One evening, Laura called, Marie, this isn't healthy. Maybe you should consider moving on. I laughed bitterly. Move on? How can I when David is right there with that girl living the life I should have had? Marie, I get it, but this obsession won't bring him back. It's only going to destroy you. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Maybe you're right, Laura, but I can't let it go. Not yet. Just promise me you won't do anything crazy, she said. I hesitated, then replied, I promise. But deep down, I knew I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I couldn't shake the feeling that Marie wasn't done. Her behavior during our meeting made me think she was planning something. I didn't want to worry Amy, so I kept my concerns to myself, but decided to take precautions. I reached out to a friend who had just earned a degree in criminal justice and explained the situation. So Marie had been seen with a known dealer and was passing money through Brian Adams, the same guy I saved Amy from during our only fight. My friend Greg said the evidence seemed suspicious, but wasn't enough for an investigation, so I stayed with Amy every night that week. By the weekend, Amy was restless. David, if you love me, take me out, she said. I don't care where, dinner, dancing, a movie, just get us out of here. Despite my concerns, I couldn't say no to Amy. Besides, she wanted to go to public places, which seemed safe. We even brought Sarah along for an extra set of eyes. We decided on the cafe, one of our favorite spots. It was busy enough that nothing shady could happen. Still, I hired a few guys who occasionally worked for us to keep an eye on things. They thought it was overkill, but they took the money. As soon as we walked in and headed to our favorite table in the back, I had a bad feeling. I noticed Brian and a couple of other guys who Amy had rejected sitting around looking unhappy, but I wasn't too worried because our guys were there too, and we had the numbers. The real shock came when we reached our table and saw someone sitting there. It wasn't that the table was occupied, it was who was occupying it. She had a new haircut, dyed hair, and was wearing an expensive dress. I wondered what she was up to. When she saw us, she waved us over. I tried to ignore her and look for another table, but Amy nudged me, grabbed my arm, and led us over. Hey Marie, can we join you? Amy asked, cheerful and unsuspecting. It all happened on Friday night. Brian, a few of his friends, and I had been hanging out at the cafe all week waiting for David and Amy to show up. They took longer than expected, but I wasn't going to miss this opportunity. The plan was simple. Spike Amy's drink with the special cocktail we prepared, have Brian and his guys grab her out the back door and take her to the next location where 10 more guys were waiting. Ironically, when I first searched for men who didn't like Amy, I couldn't find any, except Brian, so we recruited guys who did like her instead. Soon more men were eager to join, and we had to hold them back. Brian, his 2 friends, and the 10 guys at my place made a total of 13, just like the Last Supper. So this would be Amy's last supper with David, though she didn't know it yet. Afterward, she'd either break up with him herself or someone would show him the video, and he'd leave her heartbroken. If she truly cared for him, she wouldn't want that. How are you, Amy? I asked with a smile. I'm great, she replied cheerfully, snuggling up to David. She ordered drinks for all of us and brought me another beer. David wasn't drinking, just a soda, unopened. So they got up to dance as the waiter delivered their drinks. He nodded at me, signaling the job was done. I leaned back, ready to enjoy their last dance together. It wasn't really a dance, just Amy clinging to David, which disgusted me. Everyone in the cafe was watching them. When they returned to the table, Amy sipped her pink cocktail, complete with a little umbrella. David kept his eyes on me. They went back to the dance floor, leaving me with another girl. David seems to be doing well, I said, trying to make conversation. You mean since you ripped his heart out and left him for some old guy? She replied with a smile. I was shocked. Look, I'm Amy's best friend, but I'm nothing like her, she said. Amy may seem sweet, but she's tough. If you try to mess with her and David, she'll fight back, and if she can't, I will. She said it all with a smile, making it look like we were just chatting. I didn't have time to respond before David and Amy returned. Amy announced she was going to the restroom, and Sarah got up to follow her, though Amy seemed reluctant. Finally, Sarah went with her, leaving me alone with David for the first time in almost 7 years. So David, I just wanted to say you've really made progress, I began. Leave it alone, David interrupted, his voice ice cold. He looked at me like I was something to squash. I realized I'd made a mistake, but it was too late. In that moment, I knew I couldn't win. The only way to keep them apart would be for one of them to die. But if she did, David would stop at nothing to find out who was responsible. There was no getting him back, ever. Looking toward the restrooms, I saw I was too late. From his angle, David couldn't see Amy beginning to stagger as Brian grabbed her. Sarah tried to scream, but Brian punched her, knocking her down. He picked up Amy and headed for the back door. Suddenly, several guys ran after them, yelling for someone to warn David. I grabbed David's hand and pleaded, "Wait, David, she's not right for you. She's too young, not smart enough." David looked at my hand, a silent warning. So the next thing I knew, I was falling backward, crashing into the table, and everything went black. Walking out of the cafe that Friday night, I was more terrified than ever. I jumped into the car as some of my guys pointed at taillights disappearing into the night. I didn't care what kind of car it was, whoever did this couldn't get away. I peeled out of the parking lot, flooring the gas pedal, the engine roaring as I closed in, even passing another car full of my guys. I was about to use the nitrous when I saw the car slow down and pull into a driveway. Not wanting to tip them off, I parked at the next house and ran back inside. I was ready for anything. I heard a door slam, but Amy was nowhere in sight, just a bunch of guys playing cards, paying no attention to me. I staggered toward the door, and one guy grabbed my arm. "Hey jerk, I won the game, so I'm next after Brian. Take a number," he sneered. I grabbed a bottle off the table and smashed it over his head. He collapsed at my feet. Silence fell over the room for a moment before someone muttered, "Oh crap, it's him." I grabbed another guy by the neck and smashed him across the card table. So the room cleared as everyone ran for the exit. I opened the door just in time to see Amy, barely conscious, fighting off Brian. She collapsed into a chair, and despite my anger, it almost seemed funny. Brian turned, but too late. My punch knocked him out cold, followed by a kick to his side. Then I felt hands grab me from behind. "Stop it, you'll eliminate him," an officer said. "That was the plan," I replied coldly. The cop looked at his partner and said, "We didn't hear that." And I went over to Amy, took off my shirt and covered her. EMTs arrived and checked her vitals. "She's on something," one said. "Oh, we need to get her to the hospital," the officer said, "and we'll take him in for questioning." Greg showed up and spoke with the officers, who nodded and left us alone for a moment. He handed me a vial of clear liquid. "What is this?" I asked. "Do you want to go to jail?" he replied. I downed it, even though it tasted like cleaning solution. The officers returned, handcuffed me, and started to put me in the patrol car. "Hold on," Greg said, asking the EMTs to take my blood sample. They did, and as the patrol car drove away, my arm stung, but my thoughts were on Amy. At the hospital, she was kept overnight for observation. I wasn't facing charges yet, but I could be looking at several assault charges plus reckless driving. Sarah visited me later, her left eye swollen shut. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Much better now," she replied. "Seeing that idiot in the hospital after you dealt with him made me feel a lot better." "Amy is upset," she said quietly. "She doesn't understand why you're not with her. They're holding me for questioning," I explained. "I'll let her know," she said. "What does she think?" I asked. "She thinks you see her as damaged goods," Sarah laughed. Later, a solid-looking man with gray hair and a worn suit entered the room, holding a folder. "You don't look like the type," he said, checking my arm. "What type?" I asked. "I'm the chief detective on your case. Tell me your side of the story," he said. "I already know what the evidence suggests, but I want to hear it from you." "I need to see Amy," I replied. He glanced at the folder and said, "Ah, the alleged victim." "What do you mean alleged?" I asked, irritated. "Calm down. I'm just trying to get to the truth," he said. "The evidence could suggest that your girlfriend left with another guy to make you jealous. You strike your ex-wife in a rage, chase after her, and attack several people at a private residence." "That's ridiculous," I said. "Then tell me what really happened," he urged. I explained that nothing was consensual and that Amy would never do something like that. I would still love her no matter what. "That's what I needed to hear," he said. He opened the door, and there stood Amy and Sarah, looking exhausted. Amy slowly walked over and took my hand. "I was so scared," she said. "Amy knew I was coming for you," I replied, hugging her. Amy joked about her uncle not liking me, but she knew I'd do anything for her. Detective Greg told me I could go. But it turns out they had been following Marie and knew she planned the whole thing with Brian. All I got was a speeding ticket. 3 weeks later, Amy and I were married. We sold Walker and Company for a fortune, and Amy became a stay-at-home mom after we found out she was pregnant. Marie never recovered from the incident. A few months later, I visited her in a psychiatric hospital. The doctor hoped it might help her progress, but when I saw her, she didn't even recognize herself. She thought she was Amy. Amy joined me and made it clear to Marie that she had lost me for good. We walked away laughing and never saw or heard from Marie again.